Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Loving obeisances unto the Supreme Being Vasudeva, who is everything there is. Janmadhyasya yato anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhigyaswarat tene brahmahridaya adikavaye muhyanti yat surayah tejo varimridam yatha vinimayo yatra trisargo mrisha dhamna svena sada nirastakuhakam satyam param dhimahi. We meditate upon the transcendent absolute being from whom springs forth this universe. He is present in all that exists and yet distinct from everything. He is fully conscious and totally independent. He revealed to the first seer Brahma the import of Vedic wisdom. The material creation, made of threefold gunas, appears in him as though real, like water in a mirage. Being eternally self effulgent, he is ever free of the illusion Maya of the material world. We meditate upon him, the Supreme Being. Nigamakalpataror galitam phalam, Shukamukad amrita drava sanyutam, Pibata Bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. O devotees who relish a taste for divine love, Bhagavatam is the fully ripened fruit of the wish-yielding tree of Vedas, flowing as immortal nectar from Shuka Brahma Rishi. Go on drinking the sweet nectar day after day. So we are now entering the 9th chapter of the 5th Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are in the middle of this beautiful story of Bharata, the great king who renounced everything, went to the forest by the holy river Gandaki and lived a very pious life, but got attached to a young deer, and just through that one attachment, he forgot his purpose, and thereby he died and he was reborn as a deer. But fortunately, because of all his pious activities, he remembered his past life and he was full of remorse, and therefore he simply waited to quit his body by the same river Gandaki as a deer, and thereby he left his body there. That's where we left. Now we continue. Now Bharata, having left his body fully consciously as a deer, with full remorse at having wasted the opportunity of the previous human birth, and with full acceptance, and thereby with no desire to have any pleasure of any kind, but simply waiting and quitting the body. Therefore, he was blessed with the birth in a holy family to a sage called Angira. So here, what's important is this is something that Bhagavad Gita also talks about. Arjuna once asks Krishna there as to what happens to a yogi, to a devotee who engages in great sadhana, comes to this wisdom, but he is somehow unable to hold it, and because of being unable to hold it, he falls from it and he dies. Does he not lose both worlds? In other words, he doesn't enjoy the material pleasures of this world, but he hasn't realized the truth of the Supreme Being either. So to that, Krishna replies in Gita that nothing done in this regard goes a waste. If one does sadhana but somehow doesn't recognize it fully and he falls from grace, he is bestowed with a very sacred birth by which he can continue where he left off and live a very sacred life and be a source of great blessings to all of earth. So this is what is proved by the story of Bharata. He lived a very pious life and yet he fell from grace due to one small attachment to a deer of all things. So he was given a brief life as a deer because that was the last thought on his mind. And once that life has gotten over, he was blessed with the life in the body of a son of a sage so that he can completely resume where he left off. So he was born to this great sage Angira, who was very well accomplished. He had studied rituals. He knew the wisdom of the rituals. He was free from jealousy. He had no negative qualities. And so he was a very pious Brahmana sage. And this Brahmana sage had first one wife through whom he had 9 sons, and all of them were like him. They were very respectable boys. Only thing is, just like the sage, the boys were also very much studied in having studied the Vedas. They were very much attached to rituals and right conduct and so on. Then the sage had a younger wife through whom he had twins, one son and one daughter, and the son, the male child, was indeed Bharata, the supreme devotee of the Lord, who was born as a deer and now taking this birth. So he had shed his form as the animal in the previous incarnation, and now he attained the birth as the son of this sagely Brahmana to his younger wife. And he continued with the memory of his past lives. So, just as he had the memory of his fall from grace when he was born as a deer, now he also had the memory of both his past lives, both as the king and then also as the deer. And so he was very clear in what his purpose was. So, again, in Gita, Krishna says that memory and forgetfulness all come from the Supreme Being. And normally we are forgetful of our past lives and even many actions of this life which produce the present situations and so on. But in some cases, there is clear memory as well. So Bharata was very special in that he was blessed with the memory of his past life. So Krishna says in the 15th chapter, Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishto matta smritir jnanam apohanam cha. He says, I reside in the hearts of all, and from me comes smriti, jnanam, apohanam, memory, knowledge, and forgetfulness. So, even forgetfulness is a blessing sometimes, many times, and that comes from the same Supreme Being, and remembrance also comes. Here, the remembrance is a great blessing to Bharata. Because of this remembrance, it says here, Bhagavat anugrahena anusmrita swapurva janma. So his prior birth was remembered by him by the grace of God, and therefore he was very clear right from the moment he was born. So this is why people, kids even, are not what they appear to be. Some kids are very wise souls who are born as a kid, and some very old people are still very immature in their journey. So that's why very hard to look at the age of a person and to determine their wisdom. So he was a young boy, and yet he was steeped in wisdom. He was very clear now, having faced the remorse of falling from grace due to attachment and suffering the consequence of being born a deer, and now having gotten the rare human birth in the family of a holy sage. He was extremely clear in his purpose, which is to not be attached to anything, and therefore he held on to the inner abidance of only the Supreme Being and did not even care for any of the outer observances of his own family, his own father. So so it is said here, that which breaks all karma, which is the abidance in the Supreme Being, is the only thing he cared for. So his father, as we saw, and his 9 brothers, step brothers, they were all very pious Brahmanas, but they were also very much steeped in rituals and doing the right karma and so on, as many in those days were, and even now there are many seen like that. But Bharata was very clear in his ultimate purpose and not at all attached to rituals and karma. It says here, Bhagavatah karma bandha vidvamsana shravana smarana guna vivarana charanara vinda yugalam. So all he cared for was charanara vinda, the lotus feet of the Supreme Being, which is of the nature of breaking all karma. Karma bandha vidvamsana. It breaks all karmas through simply shravana smarana guna vivarana. So by simply remembering and abiding in the Supreme Being, it breaks all the fetters of karma, and that is exactly what Bharata was interested in. Therefore, he acted as if he was stupid outside. He didn't show any interest in learning even grammar, learning Sanskrit properly, learning the mantras. He came across as stupid and dumb and blind and insane, while he was inwardly completely surrendered to the Supreme Being, to remaining as the pure consciousness with no trace of ego, no trace of any attachment to anything. So, meanwhile, the father, the Brahmana, the sage, he was full of parental affection, and therefore he wanted to perform all the rites for his son. So, he did some rites, the so-called purificatory rites, but the boy was not showing any interest in all these rites. He sent him to the house of the guru, what is called gurukulavas. He came back not learning much. Then he seemed like a stupid son, and still the father thought we should do whatever we need to do. So he had already installed the sacred thread, what's called Yajnopavita, on him, and he wanted to teach him the Gayatri mantra. But even after spending 4 months, it is said, the boy wouldn't even learn the simple Gayatri mantra. So it begins with Om, and the Vyahritis, Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, and then the actual Gayatri mantra. None of that he could learn because he showed no interest, and he intentionally did not want to get caught in any ritualistic practices, including something as sacred as the Gayatri mantra. So the child did everything topsy turvy, it is said. The father was trying to instruct him in the Vedas, but he did not even grasp the Gayatri mantra. The father wanted to teach him further, and he realized that this is not even possible with this boy. And yet the father was somehow caught a little bit in this attachment, and he was constantly trying to teach him purity, trying various right practices, right conducts, how to clean oneself, how to wash oneself, how to keep oneself pure, how to offer worship to the sacred fire, how to serve. None of this was interesting for this boy. So this is the great thing about the one who abides in pure consciousness, is that all these regulatory practices which have their place to purify the mind and body are only useful up to a certain point, and after that they themselves become obstacles. So there are some who cling to these forever without letting go of it, and there are those who of course do this without any inner attachment either. So one again cannot judge by the activities externally of anyone. There are those who may engage in all kinds of proper rituals but inwardly be completely detached and offering it all to the Supreme Being as the doer and the enjoyer. But then there are many who are attached to these rituals, which are only meant for purificatory purposes, regulatory purposes. So, because Bharata was very aware, he knew what is the ultimate purpose, what is the supreme wisdom, and he knew that these have no role for him. He didn't show any interest in learning the Vedas, in learning all the purifying protocols, and in austerities, in offering fire sacrifice, none of that. He didn't even learn the Gayatri mantra, as we saw. So, this is how this boy was looking, like a dull, insane, dumb boy, and inwardly, of course, situated in the highest wisdom. So, we can recall that his father, Rishabha, the great avatar, very much lived like this after he renounced his kingdom and he roamed around. He roamed around without any clothes on, and he was taken as a dull and stupid person who would not even speak, and he was even abused by the people who did not recognize him, even though he was radiant, and he left his body. So we saw Rishabha live exactly like this, and now his son Bharata, though it took him 3 lifetimes, he had the opportunity as the king, when he retired in the forest to be completely in the supreme wisdom. He slipped out of it, then had a second life as a deer, and now in this final life, third life here, he is living exactly as his father had lived, and so he is taken as a dull dunce by everyone, including his father, and his father was still banging his head against him, as many fathers do out of attachment. And meanwhile, as it happens, before his ambition, the father's ambition could be realized, which would never be realized because the son was not interested in all that, the father was snatched away by death. The father died, and his younger wife, which is the mother of Bharata, also died. So he was left to the care of his nine brothers. And this boy, he was completely carefree. He didn't even care about anything. And these nine boys, they did not know anything. As we said, they are also very much attached to rituals, to the three Vedas, and to all the flowery words in the Vedas. So, this is again something Krishna says in the Gita, that there are many who are simply caught in the flowery words of Vedas and don't penetrate it to go to the supreme wisdom of the Vedas. So, this is how these boys were. They were caught in the rituals and they had no idea of the supreme importance of the highest knowledge, what's called as Paravidya, transcendental knowledge. And therefore they had no way to understand this step brother of theirs, Bharata. So they took him to be a dunce, and therefore he was called by them as Jada. Jada means that which is insentient in one way, or a complete dunce. So he was known thereby as Jadabharata. This Bharata now is called Jadabharata because he was considered a Jada, totally like an insentient stone by these brothers. And so they had no interest in teaching their brother anything unlike the father. So they just took him as a lunatic and they just let him go. And people were also taking him the same way. So the people, here Bhagavatam refers to them as two legged brutes. That's what unfortunately most humans are, two legged brutes. So the two legged brutes that most humans are, they were abusing him, calling him deaf and dumb, and just insulting him, and he did not care at all. He roamed around completely untouched by all these insults, and he would still do work if they asked him to do so. They were just using him for whatever work without giving any or without having any understanding of his inner state, and therefore just insulting him. He was outwardly built in a very strong way. He was a stout and muscular boy, by this time a young man he had grown up to be, and therefore they were putting him to work. And not only they, even his own brothers, they decided that they can get work done out of this boy. So they would put him through forced labor, and then they would hardly give him any food. They would give him very little, but he was completely untouched. He had completely realized his oneness with the supreme self, with the nature of absolute consciousness, which is his true being, which shines on its own. He was completely abiding in the supreme being, in God, and therefore he had no identification whatsoever with his body. He didn't care about what the body went through, heat or cold, pain, pleasure, nothing. He just roamed around like a bull, it is said. He was also not wearing anything. He was bare bodied. He didn't care about storm and rain, heat and cold. And yet he was well built, and therefore he was able to go around doing whatever work people gave him and eating whatever they gave him without any care. So sometimes they would give him just really bad food. They would give him broken rice. They would give him grains that were eaten by worms. They would give him food that was stuck to the bottom of the cooked pot, this food that is burned, and so on. And he didn't care. He just ate whatever came his way, and he was happy eating that food and content and never cared for anything. He would just lie down on the ground and sleep wherever he is. And he treated whatever food that came his way as nectar, and he slept wherever he could sleep on the ground as the most comfortable bed there is. And this is the way he was living, and he never cleaned himself, and therefore he was again very dirty outwardly. So the boy was very stout and muscular, but very covered with dirt. His sacred thread was still there, but it was also dirty. And his body, so it is said that it's like a precious gem that is covered with dust. That is how this boy was. He was radiant. His eyes were radiant for those who had the eye for it, but outwardly his body was full of dust, completely covered with dirt. And so his spiritual glory was concealed under the dirt. He had a just one small dirty cloth around his loins, and they were also extremely dirty. So essentially, he was looking in every way to be like a beggar on the street, and yet his eyes were radiant, and there was something about him that was so transcendent, and yet most of the people in the town could not perceive this. So while this was going on, what happened one day was, it is said that a bunch of thieves came that way because they were doing a sacrifice for the mother goddess Bhadrakali. Bhadrakali is the fierce form of the divine mother that many take worship to. It is a form of worship that is found in many parts where they engage in sacrifices and so on. And this is not pleasing to the Divine Mother, and yet they take to these practices out of their own propensities. And so these thieves were doing the same thing. They wanted to offer a human sacrifice, and they had caught a human, but the human being, the man they had caught, had escaped. So they came searching for this man in the same village where he had run to, and they couldn't find him. It was night time, and instead they found Bharata. They found Bharata, and he was very innocently guarding the fields of some field owner. So he was given the job to guard the fields in the night and drive away any animals like deer and boars that might come. So he was doing his job outwardly and unmindful of anything, while inwardly abiding in his own bliss and just engaging outwardly like a stupid fellow, like a guard of a field, without revealing anything about his inward state. And these thieves find him, and they find him to be a very healthy looking man. He is stout, muscular, every limb is perfect, and all that. So they immediately snatch him, and they tie him with a rope, and they drag him to the sacrifice. And he doesn't care at all. He is completely unaffected. The burglars take him, and then they have to offer him a sacrifice. So they actually clean him up. They offer him a good bath, and they give him a new cloth, and they put flowers on him. They put sandal paste on him. They put marks on his forehead, tilak, and they gave him a nice sumptuous meal. So Bharata didn't care at all. Jadabharata, for him, a sumptuous meal, and as we said, some grains that were worm eaten were the same, and new brand new clothes and his dirty loincloth were both the same. So he didn't care that they dressed him up so nicely. But then they took him, and then they took him in front of the deity of Bhadrakali, and then they started chanting all these mantras. They offered incense, they had flowers, and they had fruits and all kinds of offerings. They started singing. All this was going on. He didn't care. He was just sitting there, uncared, unmoved, abiding in his own bliss. And then finally, the chief among those thieves, who acted as the priest as well, he took out a very sharp sword as for the final act of beheading him, in order to offer him as the offering to the goddess Bhadrakali. So he did this big dance, and they were singing and everything, and they were about to behead Bharata, Jadabharata. At this moment, what happens is, Bhadrakali, as we said, she being the divine mother, she is ever always protecting the true devotees, and she doesn't care for devotees in tamasic state. These are called as tamasic worship, or ignorant form of worship, which is found in many religions too. So she did not approve of any of this, and especially now, because they are about to kill a very great Bhagavata, she instantly, it is said, manifested out of the deity, and she snatched the sword from the so called chief priest, because she could not bear that this great being, who is absolutely free inwardly, who has no sense of ego, no sense of I or mine, who is completely pure, who is totally surrendered to the Supreme Being, who is her very source, the source of the Divine Mother. As we know, the Divine Mother is the Shakti, the power that emanates from the Supreme Being. So this is a Bhagavata completely surrendered to her very source, and who is a very ray of the Supreme Being, and he had no enmity to anyone. He had become one with the infinite Supreme Being. He is the true sage. So she knows all this, and she sees these people who are fully caught in ignorance and tamas, and who are puffed up with pride, and who are acting in an evil way, about to kill an innocent great Bhagavata. So, with great fury, she snatches the sword away from the priest, and then she, with great intense rage, she beheads all those thieves instantly in one fell swoop. So all of these who were about to who were dancing and about to offer Bharata to sacrifice, were instead sacrificed, because the Divine Mother, in one quick act, grabbing the sword, killed all of them with blood pouring out of their necks, it is said. And she it is said, danced a very gory dance, because the Divine Mother, in this form of Bhadrakali, is fierce in killing the evil people. And that is what is symbolized by this dance of the Divine Mother after killing these evil thieves who were about to kill the great Jadabharata. So then she does this, and then she unmanifests from that place. But the amazing thing is, while all this is happening, Jadabharata is completely unmoved. He is just absolutely untouched by anything that is happening there. He is, what has happened there is that the very offender, the ones who wanted to kill him, have been killed by the Divine Mother Bhadrakali. But he was not touched by anything. He was not affected when he was pulled by them. He was not affected when they dressed him up nicely and offered good food. He was not affected when they were singing and dancing around him, and he was not affected when they pulled the big sword to be about to behead him. And now he is not joyous or happy either that the Divine Mother came and protected him and killed them. He was just sitting there completely. This is the highest state of perfect equanimity that is there in the highest jnani, that is demonstrated by Jadabharata. So Parikshit is addressed by Shukam Brahmarishi here. Says, O Parikshit, Shuka says, notice that this is the perfect equanimity that is demonstrated by a Bhagavata even on the eve of being beheaded. Because even when he was about to be beheaded, he did not move. He had perfect equanimity. And even when he was saved from the beheading in the last moment, he was again not excited or happy. He was equanimous. He completely remained with equanimity, with no enmity towards those thieves, with no enmity towards anyone. And he was naturally, without any will, without any desire, without any prayer, he was naturally protected by the Supreme Being, whose Sudarshana Chakra and also whose various forms, such as Mother Bhadrakali, are always there to protect his devotees, true devotees, Bhagavatas. So Shuka Brahmarishi concludes this episode by saying, this is the great quality of the completely surrendered Bhagavata, who is ever abiding in equanimity and who has no will, no prayer of any kind, and who is yet automatically protected by the Supreme Being through various forms, just as in this particular case, the form of Bhadrakali protected him. So, all this happens automatically for the one who has no will and no, in other words, if he is completely surrendered his will and he is completely abiding in the Supreme Being, then the Supreme Being takes care of him entirely, and therefore Jadabharata remained totally still, serene, equanimous, and as the perfect yogi. Because as we have seen many times, Krishna says, Samatvam Yoga Uchyate. Equanimity is yoga, and this is the highest expression of equanimity that Jadabharata displayed, and by which he was able to remain absolutely unmoved when all this happened. So with this incident gets over. Now we will go into what happens to Jadabharata going forward and the beautiful instructions he is going to give because of being interrogated by a king. We will see that going forward. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.